Hello, and welcome to That's Good, Pick It Up. This is Robbie Woodard, founder of BestBall and producer of this podcast for my friend Nate Oxman. This is part 2 of a series where Nate is chatting with Daniel Berger about his book Adventures of a Real Estate Broker and Other Stories. We hope you enjoy this podcast as well as the many others on the BestBall network. You can find them at bestball.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And now, part 2 of Nate's chat with Daniel Berger. That's good. Pick it up.
Let's go through some of the stories briefly. We won't, divulge everything, but some of them are just so good. Can you talk about being a busboy at the Japanese restaurant? I loved, hearing those stories of how those people kind of took you into their family, right?
They absolutely did. So taiko, which means drums, in 1984, I was probably I graduated in 87, so I guess I was a freshman in high school. In 1984 on Long Island, it was the first Japanese restaurant. And so the way that we got the busboy job is my friend's brother. So the restaurant must have opened 2 or 3 years before. All of the busboys were graduating, and they needed new busboys. So my friend's brother was in that group of busboys that were graduating, and they needed new people. So we basically became all the busboys. We basically went from seniors to freshmen. Um, and what's interesting about, again, this was 1984. You know, uh, these people the Japanese people hadn't been in the country that long. They were coming to America so it was interesting. The Japanese people that were generally here were people who wanted to be different, because America to them was the land of individualism.
Mm-hmm.
And Japan in the 80s was really more about being all the same,
Yeah.
right? Like if you would have seen a bus tour in New York City, they all would have the same luggage and wear the same types of clothes. The people that were at Tycho had earrings and colored their hair, were and were different. They were a total motley crew,
Very cool.
legitimately. And what was amazing also to me was their love of golf. My parents grew up in the city. I lived across the street from a golf course on Long Island, the Links Club. My parents never did anything with golf. I didn't do anything with golf until I worked at Tyco, where part of my compensation, so I would work there over the summers as well. And part of my compensation was that they would take me to Bethpage State Park to play golf before the restaurant opened, and everything about it. I mean, I say in the book, like I would go. I'd stayed at their house a couple times, or I'd get there and then we'd sleep after work, and then we'd go to the golf in the morning. But like whenever I was there, I could never even look at anything on the wall. If I saw a painting or a picture that I liked, they would say, "Here, you have it, take it, but we want you to have it." So they were the most giving people, um, and were so respectful. And so it was really more. It was not just a job. It was like very important of how it shaped me. Um, I ended up at some point tutoring the owner's children when I was a senior, and they needed help with English or math. Um, so I helped them. Um, Another funny story from the book is they had a sushi restaurant so they had one in Rockville Center, the town that I lived. Then they opened another one in Barrack where I was ended up. I've done every job there. That was when you were there. I was there. If the dishwasher didn't show up and they needed to say, "Danny, can you do that?" So then I was the dishwasher that day. At one point when I got a little older, a senior, they're like, "You can be a waitress." So they didn't call it a waiter because they were very much like that was a woman's job. But they were like, "You can do it, but we're calling you the waitress." I go, "You can call me anything you want as long as I can keep the tips." So, but I bartended, I did whatever. But I was probably a sophomore, probably a junior when this story happened. And the sushi bar up at Hunter Mountain is a ski resort out in upstate New York. Um, they would have the sushi bar Saturday and Sundays. Probably it would open at about 11:30 for lunch, and it would close at like 7 o'clock on Saturday, and maybe on Sunday it closed at like 5. And so generally they were tired, they were whatever they were doing. And when the car was going up, it was like sometimes it was a van. This one case, it was basically like, I don't know if you remember from the Brady Bunch, it was like this station wagon with like wood paneling on the side.
Oh yeah.
Was like the Brady Bunch or Partridge Family type of and it was me, it was the owner, and full of fish. Right. I think that fit maybe another. So it was all full of, and the fish is just, it was either in like a styrofoam cooler or just on ice. Right. And we're driving up, and Hiro Ishikawa was the owner. He was too tired to drive. He's like, Danny, can you drive for me? And we probably left at like 5:30 from Long Island. Or 5:30, maybe it was 7, maybe, because it was only about 2.5, 3 hours. It was about 3 hours. So I was like, sure, I'll drive. The only problem is I only had a learner's permit, right? And so the rule with the learner's permit in New York is that you can only drive with your parents. So I had I must have had the permit on me. I'm driving it up, and like maybe 10 minutes from the mountain, we get pulled over. I get pulled over for speeding. And so I roll down my window. The police officer comes over. I show my and he's like, I'm assuming that's not your father. I'm like, no, he's the owner of the restaurant. We have a sushi bar at Hunter Mountain. And so it was probably the first of many tickets that I've gotten, not I didn't get. And so it was an amazing story. And Hero was dying, and that story was probably told 100 times at the sushi bar that day.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was just like stories like that. We also catered rock concerts, so I got to be backstage for like Phil Collins, for Dire Straits, for Rush, So the experiences that I had with that were amazing. So and I tried to talk about like a lot of the jobs that I had. That was one of my early jobs that I had prior to real estate.
And you did a great job of showing the reader how those jobs shaped you, and you were. It seems like you were born to be a salesman from your delivering papers to working for Poland Spring. All of those jobs had to have contributed to where you are today, don't you think?
Absolutely. So yes, delivering newspapers and penny savers, I probably started at 8 years old. Um, the Tyco was more customer service and dealing with people and things like that. Um, the my first job out of college, in college, I sold ad space for my school newspaper, and it was commissionable. But like I made a deal with Domino's Pizza. They were taking 2-page, full color page ads, that were like $900 each time. They were running at 1,800 a week. My commission was like 20%. So I've always been like selling like that. And then my first job out of school, I sold insecticides and herbicides in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I actually lived in Walnut Grove, Mankato, which is basically where Little House on the Prairie was based out of. So I think those were more selling. I would say that what's interesting about real estate is I don't view it that I sell. So I think the time that I do sell would be if someone has me come to their house and they want to know why they should use me to list their house.
Yep.
That's probably a little bit more me selling. But when I represent a buyer, for the most part, it's customer service and making sure that they get the right house. And I think one of the stories that I talk about is that I had 200 and I worked with a client that I showed them 205 separate houses over the course of like 13 months. So sometimes we would go back and see the same house 2 or 3 times. That didn't count as more than one house. That
Oh
was
my
one house that we saw
gosh.
3 times. And people were like, "Why don't you just fire them?" A lot of people after 40 houses are like, there are some agents that think if you don't buy a house after 20 times, I'm no longer working with you. And I was like, if they want to buy a house, we just haven't found the right house that meets their needs. And so it was basically every Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'd get in the car, I'd pick her up, she'd give me the list, I'd have pre-made the appointments. Sometimes her husband would go, sometimes he wouldn't. He felt like she's never gonna buy a house because she loves getting picked up by me. I drove her, and sometimes her friends would come or whatever. 205 the 200 and so what's interesting is I showed this house in White Plains, New York to another client. The client says, "No, it's not for me." And I'm like, "I know who would want this house." And basically I must have FaceTimed them from that house and said, I found a house for you. I go, we're going to end at 205. And they were like, there's no way. And then they basically, I sent them the listing. They're like, okay, when can we see it tomorrow? And from them not having good bids, they never really had a good bid because they never really liked the house. It
Yeah.
was more like settling. So their bids were off because they're like, well, if I can get it for $150,000 less, I'd buy it. This was like COVID, right? I'm like, that's not a thing. Oh, we found this house. Their bid was spectacular. It was like 1.2 million, all cash, and we closed like within a month. And so it turned out that I still probably made like $100 every showing. So that's like, to me, that was fair,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you
Yeah.
make more. So I didn't have a problem, but what even better than that, then eventually her mother passed. I ended up selling a multifamily for $1 million for them in the Bronx, and they've referred multiple people to me. So they enjoyed the experience so much that their entire family now are real estate agents. So they actually had a friend that was a real estate agent. It was interesting to me that they didn't work with that friend to buy a house.
Yeah.
That's where they're working out. And I've always, every time I post something on Facebook, she is constantly, he's the best, he's so good, whatever. And they were the first people at the house at the book signing. They're chapter 5, 205 houses. They were unbelievable. They came, they wrote amazing things about the book on Facebook. They're like my biggest fans. And that just shows that you don't give up, especially like I never pushed them. And if they didn't like a house, we wouldn't bid on it, right? So because you have to, if you have the long game, in your view, you treat things differently than if you're like, transactional and thinking only about this week, this month, this quarter, this year. You I have people where I've done 10 or 10, like chapter 10 is Brian and Antoinette Network.
Yep.
When I wrote the book, I think I had 10 deals with people that they've given me, them and their 10 people. Since then, I now have $2 million places that are on the market in the Bronx because they view me that anything real estate, Danny's the guy to go to,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, and so, so we that's how I view it, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't look at people as dollar signs. They're everyone's people, and I've done deals that are so tiny. Like I've done $20,000 land sales. I've done a 250 square foot apartment that went for like, they bought it for 40,000. 4 years later, we sold it for 55,000. But like, it's not a trend. You look at it like a person, and I was there to help somebody, and that's what they felt comfortable buying. And I actually made almost no money. I actually probably made no money because at some point the woman got sick, and I donated most of it to her medical GoFundMe. But again, she was always saying things on Instagram and Facebook, and referred people to me too. And so, you know, it's kind of like pay it forward. I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
I really, that's been a strategy that's worked for me, kind of the golden rule. Um, like people were like, so chapter 14 is Danny Warbucks, where I basically taken this 94-year-old person that has no family, and the things that I have had to go to court to stop his foreclosure. I've had to fight with Social Security. They actually turned him off Social Security. I had to prove why he's alive, and they shouldn't. He hadn't been to a doctor in 10 years. I took him to his first doctors. I moved him from a hotel that he was at for 3 years, and I helped. I fixed everything there. I then researched what senior centers, senior living places to put him in, and people are like, "You're not related to him?" I'm like, he's a client. Because there's nobody else. There is nobody else, and I'm so blessed that I'm able to have the time, the energy, the money that I can help other people. Because if I was in their situation, I would want to have a benefactor or someone to help me. Um, And to be fair, it does make me feel like I do get positive feelings for helping Andrew in this case, right? Like
Hmm.
I was just there yesterday and um, we were chatting it up a little bit and he likes his job. We were talking about the SNAP benefits and there was a little hiccup of that going away, but what's interesting is he has enough money in his card. I said, they just didn't refill you for November, you still have money on it because he's in a place that's feeding him. I'm more like getting it for others. He qualified for it, so I'm making sure that I'm getting enough juice and milk and other items. Yogurts and things to make sure that he has what he needs to supplement. But so it's I've learned a lot of things about Medicare, Medicaid. I got him on Medicaid. Um, you know, and everything to do with him losing a house and then fighting in court to prevent his condo from being taken from him. Um, so it's quite interesting, but you know, it just you just try to help people, and I feel so lucky that I'm able to help people.
Yeah, that certainly comes across in the book, just your willingness to go above and beyond to help others. Do you have time to go through a couple more?
Sure. Um,
You have to
I
talk about the porn house.
so the I was going to talk about another thing, fatso, but
Oh,
we
yes, those are the 2 I was going to next.
so the another thing, fatso, that's the one I changed the name of the person.
Right, I
The
figured.
person obviously has some mental things, but what's interesting is the owner of the owner of that apartment, I helped rent it a couple of times. We put somebody in who wouldn't leave, and we ended up having to evict the person because he needed to sell it. I think he had some tax liabilities that were coming due, and he had to pay it, so we needed to sell. We had to get like eviction attorneys. This woman's like, so we put the house in the market, and the person that's living there is a nightmare, and she was making it so difficult. So, like, every time we had a showing, like, the owner had to go, not me, the owner had to go.
Yeah.
And so it turned out that there were stories about the owner in the Daily News, in the well, Daily News, but also New York Post. He happened to have owned a strip club. He happened to probably, this is way before I even knew him, happened to probably forget to pay some of his taxes. That sometimes happens when you're in a cash business.
Yep.
And so there were stories about the guy. And she basically left me like 14 voicemails in a row that were basically going off on him about he's a horrible person. The funny thing, he was the greatest landlord. He wasn't mean to her. He basically was like, he had been in prison at least. I think he did more weekends. I didn't ask him. I could do enough reading about it. To me, he was always so pleasant. Followed up. I had no problem with him whatsoever. But so she's sending me all this stuff. I'm like, okay, that's his past life. People are allowed to have past lives. Um,
Yeah.
but and then she's complaining like so when the house it was funny the apartment's on the market and I kept getting so many leads from people and then I realized pretty quickly that she was calling other agents to see if we were really selling the house and she was putting in offers. She didn't have any funds to do it. Her brother-in-law was actually paying for her. I really said to her brother-in-law, why don't you just buy the apartment for her? But then there was a problem is she was such a bad tenant that the building wanted to kick her out. So it was kind of like all these things, and like you cannot even imagine. So the last voicemail of these 14 that she left, and I don't I deleted all of them except for this one. She has a really raspy voice, and I actually saved the voicemail, and I can send it to you. I played it for people. I still have it. Um, and the end of the chapter is actually word for word what she left on my voicemail.
Yeah, I
And
liked that.
and, and it starts off like, and another thing, fatso, like in this really raspy voice. And to be fair, that was my pre-Ozempic days. So I was fatter. I still, the funny thing is I went from like 245 pounds to I'm like 210 now. And between Zepbound, Ozempic, and Wegovy, actually one of my that's another story for another day. One of my clients put me on that. He's a doctor and he put me on the drug. So I do have to thank him for that. Um, but so I still identify as a fat person, so if that helps with the story at all. So that was a crazy story. We ended up selling it, but it was so painful. It was so he ended up getting a restraining order against her, and the judge, like, this is a guy that's been in jail, gets a restraining order about his tenant, and the judge during the case was basically like almost got her for contempt of court during like a during Zoom trial. It was like on Zoom. It was crazy. It was you can't even make this stuff up. So
Yeah,
that's why I
yeah.
was like, how do we tell them the story? And so that was kind of the story.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just I can't imagine. And you had other stories where sold houses that were in just unbelievable condition, right? You open the door and you're just like, "Holy like
That happens a lot. Luckily, there are still a lot of people that are trying to get houses for flips and
yeah.
fix and flips. So that's generally so you have to position it and price it right to be able to do that. But yes, what's worse is that I've had houses that are like that with people that are still living in it. And then
Yeah.
people are like, well, why aren't you cleaning out the house? And I'm like, it doesn't really work that way, right? So it's
Right.
like that's when you're dealing with people. And I'm like, you don't want to embarrass someone. And sometimes they'll move out, and sometimes they won't. But it's like I've had houses where people are getting divorced and they don't really have money, and that's the best that they can do. And so I'm always respectful. And sometimes I'll bring my cleaner in. And I won't show. I'll just have a little bit of a cleanup, but
Yep.
it's not always again like $1 million listing where you can stage things, and that's just not how it works. And so ultimately, I feel I try to rule with compassion and try to make sure that we can get the right amount of money to help whatever. But there's also stories of in one of my deals, all the people's houses were all their only equity was the house. They
Mhm.
didn't have money and they needed to. And so what happens is you have to generally sell your house before you can get into the next place, right? And
Right, yeah.
if you don't have money for a deposit, first month rent, security deposit, commission, whatever, you're kind of out of luck. So I've had to, for a client, basically knowing that I'm about to sell their house, I basically lent that. I've lent money a lot, and I lend it at no cost to try to help them and get the deal along. So the one example I had, I paid their first month, I paid their security, and then I said they will pay you the full year once I sell their house. So they're like, okay. Then they move in, and then we find out at the last minute they didn't own their house. Well, they didn't officially own their house. We thought they owned their house, but it turned out at the last minute, an old deed came up that showed that she only owned 30% of the house and her sisters owned the other 66%. And we're lucky that there was no feuding because we had to basically get the lawyers involved and get documents signed that let the people that own more of the house give her their portion of the house. Um, and if they didn't do that, it could have been a problem.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I also paid that those people besides paying for their first month, last month, and all that. I also their deck was in shambles, and I needed to have their deck like the holes in the deck fixed and then it painted. And so what was interesting when that one closed, I think my commission was like $15,000 and I got like $32,000 in money that I lent that turned out not to be secured by their house because they didn't own their house without interest. So, you know, but guess what? They've referred multiple people to me. So, you know, I did it to help them, but in the end of the day, I got lucky because good things happen from it.
Yep. Yeah, like you said before, pay it forward. And Danny, they're just the stories in the book are great. We want don't want to give them all away. Tell people how they can get a hold of the book.
Sure, that would be great. I think it's 9.99 on Amazon. You can get the paperback. Hardcover, I think, is 39.99, which is great because it's a hardcover, it's a keepsake, and the pictures are in color. Or I think it's also on the Kindle for like $5. And you just have to go to Amazon.com and put in the Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. or my name, Daniel Berger, and even Bailey Herman. Bailey is my co-writer. So what the one thing on Bailey, she was like, "Well, maybe I want to be a ghostwriter." I said, "No, no, no. If you're not putting your name on
Yeah,
my book, then I don't want you to do it." So because I'm like, "You're young, you need this." And then the other cool thing about my book is the so I went to WashU, Bailey went to WashU, and the cover was designed by a graphic artist who's friends with my daughter who also went to WashU.
very
So
cool.
I loved that I was able to Brooke Adler, shout out to Brooke who helped me design the cover. Um, that was her first book cover that she did. So I love that I was able to like everything's about like networking, right? And
Oh
and
yeah.
and helping people. So my book is the combination of all that as well. So I'm proud that I'm able to do that. And again, I like that when people read it, they don't say it sucks. I like that.
um, and are you on social media? How can people find you on social media? Do you still do that podcast?
I still have a podcast, and luckily for me, it's the same name, The Adventures of a Real Estate Broker. You can go see it on YouTube, on every other platform where podcasts are. Um, if you put in, I think Daniel M. Berger Real Estate, you probably would get my, a link to me. Or I give out 914-565-0665 is actually my personal cell phone number. I get texts and calls, and I can help people really anywhere in the world because if if you're in, I just helped a friend buy a house in Florida. I researched their town. I found an agent that I thought would work with them, and then they just bought a house in Boca. So I can do that anywhere in the world. I've helped people all over. So um, New York and Connecticut is more of where I work, but I can always, and then a lot of times I have people that might want to call just to, you know, they could be an agent and have questions. They can be new. They can be thinking about real estate. I mentor a lot of different people. And unlike many coaches that charge, I don't charge for my coaching. I feel again, it's to pay it forward. And I like talking to people and giving guidance where I can.
That's awesome, Danny. Thank you again for taking the time to do this, and congrats on the book. And let's tee it up in 2026.
Well, there you have it. That wraps up the second and final part of Nate's conversation with Daniel Berger about his book, Adventures of a Real Estate Broker and Other Stories. If you like it, there are links in the show notes to where you can find this book and support Daniel. Until next time, this is Robbie with BestBall. You've been listening to That's Good, Pick It Up, a podcast by Nate Oxman. We've got some exciting things in store for you, so be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any adventures. That's good. Pick it up.